All right, looks like we're recording.
Did you get audio for that too?
I did. It looks like it's capturing it here. I think this is a microphone setting. Whoa. So I will leave that
Great.
there. All right, here we go. Can I hide that? First technique I wanted to talk to you about is just a very, very simple one, but it's going to be a basis for a few things that we do. If you want to open up the photograph of this kid, when this was shot, it was just shot outside with no external light. You can see there's very even light around him. It was using a lens that had a very shallow depth of field. That means that things that are within a certain plane are in focus, and then everything behind or everything in front would be soft or out of focus. That creates an appearance of more definition. It creates kind of a moody feeling. It isolates your subject a little bit. So that's kind of what we're starting with. This has been color treated to kind of give you a little bit more of a washed out look to it. It has a little bit of a cold look. So the color tones on this are not sunny and warm. They're a little more just a little more cold, a little contemporary in its look. But if we wanted to mess around with this to create a theme, there's a bazillion different things we could do, and I wanted to show you one that's really easy. To take that to something like this, which is kind of a, you see this a lot on like skateboard packaging and things that are a little more young and urban. It's a little bit of a kind of like a duotone technique, but it's used with multiple colors. So I guess it's not a duotone, but it's
Multitone?
Multitone, yeah, quad tone. It's very simple to do. The first thing you do is you need to create an adjustment layer that removes the color, either all or some of it, over your photograph. I'm going to throw mine away and show you how to do that. I think the first class we talked about the little cookie that's dipped in milk. It's the fourth option over on the bottom of your layers palette. If you click on that, that gives you a list of the adjustment layers that are available to you. So these are non-permanent adjustments to your image that work in your layer stack. So you can adjust the opacity, you can turn them off, you can throw them away, you can stack them. They're very, very useful. And in this case, we could just go to the black and white one, but I want to leave a little bit of color, so I'm going to go to Hue Saturation. Over here in my Adjustments palette, it represents everything that I would get in a normal hue saturation adjustment. And I'm going to pull the saturation down. I want to leave a little bit of color just because I prefer it that way, so it's not completely flat, but you can make the choice at that point. Then the next thing that I do is, let me throw these two away, is I need to create a new layer, and I need to put some kind of a gradient of color on it. Now, in the case that you just previously saw, I actually had a gradient. If you come over here to your gradient tool, which is under your fill tool, and click on your gradient editor, you can see that there is a couple that are kind of rainbowy. I could grab one of those and drag it across here and use that as a base. I'm going to just try something different. I haven't tried this, so if it looks terrible, I apologize. I'm just going to grab another one. I'm going to make sure it's a linear gradient. I'm going to start from one corner and drag to the other, and it should give me a nice, even, kind of a sunny look. From here, to get this to interact with my photograph, I have to change the layer blend mode. We've experimented with multiply, overlay, and I think screen in this class. But if we click where it says normal here and we start to dive down a little bit deeper, there's one called soft light that just has a nice effect on photographs. You can go ahead and click that one. If you don't like it, you're welcome to try the others. So that immediately creates a relationship between the two, right? And it gives us a different themey look. If we're doing a package of flip-flops or something like that, this would be a nice kind of sunny, warm image that's not just a standard full color image. And then from here, if we want to add some more colors or intrigue to it, we could again create more layers and use the soft light layer blend mode attribute. Or one thing I like to do is, let's say I wanted to have some purple in here for some reason. I could get purple as my foreground color, or this is kind of a pink purple. Get a big soft paintbrush. So I'll come over here into my paintbrush, choose one that the hardness is at 0, so it's soft, and then make sure it's nice and big. And again, the keyboard shortcut on your paintbrush, once you have it out here and you want to change the size of it, is your bracket keys up and down on your keyboard. Change my mode from normal to soft light, so as I start to use it, it will create that interaction automatically for me. and then I can start to paint in or tap in different areas of color. And of course, because this is its own layer, I can adjust the opacity and make it more or less dramatic. I could do it again with another layer. Go to soft light. Let's say I wanted to add some blue. Do the same thing. Doesn't show up as well because I'm covering some other colors. I can adjust the opacity to pull it up or pull it down. And I can start to add different color treatments in here that give me a completely different look than what I had originally. I'm going to adjust the brightness on this thing because his face is a little brighter than I.
Your mic is echoing on the computer.
It is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
turn that volume back on, QuickTime down a little bit.
This volume?
No,
No.
QuickTime.
The QuickTime? Oh, okay. Where did my QuickTime go?
There.
Better?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Let me turn this brightness down a little bit. Okay. Got better on his face. So this is technique one. Very simple, easy, but it creates a totally different thematic presentation of a photograph than just the straight full color image. So I'm going to go ahead and close this one. Now you notice with a lot of these techniques we're going to want to make them have the amount, well, we want to create a new image that doesn't necessarily kill or become destructive to our original pixels. So I'm going to use a lot of adjustment and blend layers. You can achieve these things in other ways, but this gives us the most opportunity to change on the fly, throw things away, whatever. Technique number two is a little more complicated, but not too bad. I'm going to open this up in Photoshop. And it's taking an image which originally looked like this and adding some texture to it, popping out some colors, adding maybe a little bit of blur or motion to it so that we have a nice finished composite. Right, looks a little illustrative. So in this case, I'll show you what I did. I'm going to go ahead and throw these away. Hope I remember. And I'll start with my raw photo. I think you guys have this one as well. You can pull this background down so that we have a copy. We don't want to work on the original necessarily. On the copy, I'm going to go in and I'm going to adjust the hue saturation and make it wild. So I'm going to go Edit, or sorry, Image, Adjustments, Hue Saturation. Now I could do this in a non-destructive way, but because I am making a very dramatic technique and I still have my base layer, which is the background layer at the bottom that I want to preserve, I don't care if I mess it up because I can always throw it away. Once I get here, I'm just going to take the saturation button and I'm going to move it way up. Now that's going to make her look crazy, but it's also going to make the background look crazy. Her crazy is not too good because it starts to get a little glowy and solarized. I can also look to adjust the hue, which makes her a little bit like a Oompa Loompa or something. So I can try different colors in that background, trying to pop it out one way or another. And let's just say we kind of like this green. And then the lightness or darkness, of course, I could adjust as well. I usually don't mess too much with that. And then I'll click OK. So that's not a good solution for a photograph, right? Because the background might look a little cooler than before, but she doesn't look very good. So what I would do in this instance is I would take this background image and do one of two things. I'd either erase some of it out, the parts of her that I want to keep, so that on top, while it's on top of the original layer, she shows through where I want her to be at a normal color, but the background remains. Or I could do a mask. A mask is a better way because it's not permanent. It's basically revealing and concealing part of this layer. And so I'll show you how to do that. I think we're all aware of how to use an eraser for it. So to make a mask, I'm going to click my third icon in at the bottom of my layer palette. Once I click that, a mask has been initiated over there in my layers palette. It's the little blank piece right here, chain link to my picture. I'm going to get a paintbrush. I want it to be nice and soft and big. And I have white and black as my options immediately when I'm working on my mask. I know my mask is selected because it has this little frame line around it. I come over to my image, and if I'm to click and I have white, nothing happens. Because white adds to our mask, and our mask already includes everything. Everything's visible. So I want to change it to black. Now if I had a shade of gray, that would work like a certain percentage of transparency, or become more opaque or less opaque, depending on how dark or light the gray is. So keep that in mind. But pure black, if I come over here and I start clicking, will basically, you look over here in my mask, it's starting to build a mask. It's kicking out part of that image. I'm going to go ahead and make my paintbrush a little smaller. And because it's soft, it's forgiving. I don't have to select everything perfectly. But I'm allowing the parts that I want to stay true in color to be there, and taking advantage of the funky stuff that I did to the background. Now if I mess up, so let's say I slip and go, oh, I wanted that. All I have to do is switch from white to black in lieu of an undo, and I can paint back some of that mask. So this is a non-permanent or non-destructive way to conceal or reveal part of an image.
I have
So,
a question for you.
Yes.
When I do the mask, my white is the one that erases.
Eraser.
How did you start your mask? Did you make a selection first, or?
I just press the mask button.
Huh. And you're using your paintbrush tool?
Oh, I'm using the eraser, that's why.
Ah,
Yeah, okay.
duh.
If I painted, got it.
Got it. Yep. So this is where we started. Here's where we've gone. Now you guys have probably seen photographs that have crazy saturated, gnarly backgrounds of leaves and jungles and stuff. You're like, how in the heck did they do that and keep the person or the main subject the right color? Well, this is a quick and easy way to do that. So that's one way that we can alter this photograph. If you remember, there was kind of some blurry stuff behind her. Let's learn how to do that. All I need to do is copy this layer of the mask that we have with her on it. Well, you know what? Let's do it this way. Let's copy the background. And what we'll do is we will go and hide our mask for a second, and then we're going to go Filter, Blur, Motion Blur. And we can set an angle. I'll put it kind of on an angle, and we can add kind of a crazy blur to her. Now in this same circumstance, if we were to put this on top, you kind of see the blurry part, we would want to figure out where we want this blur to occur, on which layer, right? So right now, if it goes on top of everything, everything is blurry. So I may want to put another mask on this and go ahead and get my big soft eraser, or sorry, my big paintbrush. And start to paint her out, or part of her out. And I'm going to be a little bit lazy about this, just so we don't spend a million years on it.
Ken,
Yes.
is there a way to copy a mask? So like you already have that mask made.
Uh-huh.
Is there a way to just pull it to another level?
I don't know. Actually, you can command click it, and it will give you a selection of everything in the mask. So if I was to start a new layer, once I have that selected, then I could just click a new mask, and you see how it's there. So that's one way to do it. I don't know if you can drag it. I've never. I guess we could try. No, none of the commands give me the little duplication arrow, but that would be one way to try it. So I have this. Now I want it to interact with this background, so I can look and I can say, well, what would happen if I screened it, if I overlaid it, if I lightened it. So there's different things we could do, but it's really not giving us what we want. So
Did you copy that mask?
no, I just repainted it
Oh,
in.
you did?
Yeah, so they actually don't line up perfectly.
Can you copy it?
By if you click on the, you use your command key.
Yeah, if you want to use the same mask for the saturation.
Yes.
Level.
So let me throw this away. Okay, so here's where we were. Right?
Okay.
This is on top. Let's put it at normal. So there's no mask applied. I can command click the mask, which gives me a selection of it, and then just click it up there. So a mask is basically on-off, reveal, conceal. I can copy that on-off by command clicking on the mask, which gives me a selection. And then when I click a new mask, it respects that selection.
Oh, I see.
One other thing I can do here is I can go in and say I want to do a filter, sharpen, unsharp mask, and I want to sharpen up some of this blurry stuff. I may want to go image, adjustments, where's my levels? Levels, and maybe darken and lighten it. So I can do a bunch of things with this. And then I've of course let her through. I still have this mask, but I don't see the funky colors underneath. So there's a couple things I can do. I can change the layer of priorities and try seeing how these things interact. That's an overlay. That's a color. Soft light we've messed with before, and I can try to find something that looks good. I thought that overlay was kind of cool. Or there's just a million things I can do with starting to erase different parts and trying to keep or get rid of them. But that adds kind of a unique technique to it. The last thing that I did on this one that we saw earlier was I used a texture, and I put the texture over the top and masked that as well. So if you go into your students folder, I think you have a texture. I grabbed one that was metal. You can use any one that you want. I open that up in Photoshop. So there's my layer of metal. This could be something that you find, buy, create, take a picture of, whatever. I'm going to hold down Shift and drag it over to my subject. Again, I can resize it, do whatever I want with it here, recolor it, sharpen it. Let's just sharpen it for fun, because that was our last filter. Makes it a little more deep. Then I change the mode from normal to multiply or darken or something, and you see it immediately adds this grungy texture, which again is no good over her, and it's probably no good at 100%. So I'm just going to pull it back so I see a little bit of it. It adds a little bit of a grain up in this top corner, around in this corner. And then I'll go ahead and get a big soft eraser, or I'll do a mask again. I can use the original mask, but I'm going to kind of do this one on the fly. Click on it, get black paint, come in here, and I'm going to tap around on it. This is 100%. I could pull it back a little bit so that I maintain some of that texture on her skin, but it's not distracting.
How would you use the same mask? If you wanted just to use the same one, do you copy it?
The one I did
Yeah.
from before? Okay, so that was kind of what I showed. Let me copy this one so I can keep that one. Hide it. I'll throw this away. So if you want to duplicate, this is the only way I know how to do it. There might be a better way. If you want to duplicate a mask, you have to command click the mask. That makes a selection. So whatever's on the mask becomes selected. Then click on your new layer, and then click the mask tool, and it will respect whatever was on that mask. If you already had a mask selected, so let's do that. So I come over here, I click a mask, but there's nothing on it. I could still command click on the mask that I want to copy. It makes a selection, and then I could hit, as long as I'm over here on the mask on the layer, I think I could hit Option Delete, which basically adds black into all those areas. I want just the opposite, so I'd have to select the inverse Option Delete, which is like filling it with black paint, deselect, and it does the same thing. So when you're in your mask mode, you have the opportunity to paint in and out of it, or fill in and out of it, or use gradients in and out of it, and it's just basically a white sheet of paper with black, white, or something in between, which allows it to either be transparent or fully opaque or somewhere in between. So all of your selections, all of your paint brushes, your gradients and filters apply in that mask. And we'll actually show you how to copy a shape into a mask and to use that, which is pretty cool. So that gives us a much different photograph. Do you agree? Has a little grunge element, totally different color elements than where we started. Right? Very thematic. Much more thematic. So that's the second technique, building on some of the blend modes that we learned in the first technique and then adding some textures and some masking. So I'll close that. Alright, what else we got in here? One question I get asked a lot is how do you create kind of a dynamic black and white image? Looks a little better on my screen than it does here, but if you'll notice, this image has a lot of white, a lot of black, and very limited gray. And this is much more of a fashion looking shot. It's more of a traditional black and white image like you'd see in a magazine. Now, when a photographer goes out and tries to shoot this kind of image, they usually put a filter on their camera, like an orange or a yellow filter, which basically manipulates the way the light enters their camera, and it gets rid of some of the mid values. So when I think of old time life pictures and stuff like that, I think they're very dynamic black and white like this. And this can be achieved in 10 different ways in Photoshop, but I'll show you kind of how I do it here. One little trick is you take a color image, and instead of going into your adjustment layers and choosing your hue saturation and taking the saturation all the way back, which will leave you with a very gray image, right? You can click it. There is actually a black and white adjustment, which is a new one, but it gets a little complicated because it goes into channels. So instead, what I like to use, it just gives you a better black and white, is the gradient map. Oops, yeah. Gradient map, and then change the gradient from black to white, and click OK. And you can see that this is a little more dynamic and not so bland gray as our regular black and white. And that's just a quick trick, a quick way to do it.
How do you change that again?
You just come up to the actual gradient here, and it looked like it was set originally there. There's all these different options,
Oh, okay.
right? And you want to go from black to white. If that is reversed and it's white to black, you can always click reverse here. So that gives you the inverted look like we had last week when we were doing those drawings. So that's the first thing I do. The next thing I do is really simple too. I just click on the cookie and I go into my levels. And then looking at my image, I make sure that there's black represented. Right now there's a gap here. This histogram is basically a map of black, white, and everything in between. So you can see there's lots of white already included in this image by the way it's shot. The exposure was very bright. There's not a ton of mid values and absolutely no black right now. So as I move this slider over, that basically takes those things that were almost black and makes them black and darkens it up. If I take the white over a little bit, it whitens things up even further, which means we're actually going to lose some detail because we're beyond where it really started. And then this mid value, depending on how I want it keyed, will take all those midtones. So this is no good in the case of having lots of black and lots of white and not as many midtones. I want to drag it a little bit to the left. Okay? And then once I'm here, one trick that I really like is that drawing trick we learned last week. So I'm going to copy the background. I'll go ahead and put it on top of everything. I'll do this quickly because we already learned it. I go Image, Adjustments. I just do the regular hue saturation, pull it back, or desaturate command, I think is in there as well. So this is a very gray image. Remember, compare this to what we have here. That's really boring. That's dynamic, right? So we're already ahead of the game. But we don't want the dynamic in the drawing that we're going to do because the less black we have in it, the more lines we'll end up with. And you have to kind of figure it out by doing it a few times to be convinced of that. But trust me. Take this, copy it, Image, what was it? Adjustments, Invert, or Command I, Normal, Color Dodge, Select, or sorry, Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, get some lines. Okay. Go ahead and merge those two together. I'm just going to shift click, come over here, merge layers, and then change this from normal to multiply. And that gives me a little more thickness and a little more depth, and then I can adjust the opacity onto that. So that's the technique with nothing, and then I can just tease it up, and you can see a little difference like in her eye detail and a few things. Makes it a little more thick and rich. Okay, so that's several steps, right? We created 2 adjustment layers, and then we had to do all the steps associated with the drawing. But if you practice it a few times, It's a very effective technique to make a much more rich, interesting black and white image than just desaturating an image. You agree? Awesome. We're clicking right along here. Technique 4. I got to remember what this is. All right. Technique 4. I think did I throw this in your
You have a picture of a kid.
picture of the kid, but not all this stuff? Okay. This kind of make up as you go, and it's kind of a culmination of tons of different effects. And so I'm not going to go through one by one and do them all, but I'm going to kind of deconstruct it and show you how it's built. I take my image and I immediately copy it, and then I do an overlay. I'll just show you that one quick. Take any image, drag a copy so you have the original on the bottom and the duplicate on top. Change the mode from normal to overlay, and it immediately adds tons of depth, and it gives you a little more of an HDR look. Usually it's too much, so you want to adjust the opacity back, but it will add a little more contrast and definition in any photo. Soft light does the same thing, it's just a little more subtle. So I had that done. Then there's something that I really like to do, and it's using a filter called the high pass filter. Have we talked about that yet? It's a non-destructive way to sharpen your image. So traditionally with sharpening, we can go on an image, filter, sharpen, unsharp mask, or use one of the other sharpen techniques here. But we have to do that on the layer of the photograph, and it gets a little pixely to me. Another way is to kind of fake it using that drawing technique and multiply, but that really thickens things up. So there's another technique that a lot of photographers use called a high pass filter, and it's really pretty simple, but it does require 2 steps. And that is, you just copy your picture. I'm going to go ahead and put the opacity at 100% on this because we want to get the effect in full view. We go to our filter menu and we go down to something called Other. It's kind of like we don't know what to categorize these filters as because they're kind of weird. And the second one down is High Pass. When I click High Pass, what it immediately does, oh, you know what, I already have this in overlay mode, so let me put this in normal mode. I'm sorry. Filter, Other, High Pass. What it does is it takes 50% gray, makes everything 50% gray, and then anything that it can create a little contrast from, similar to our drawing technique, as you move the radius up, it starts to reveal. And that basically is going to create some lines, some hard lines, that if we use a blending technique, show through in Photoshop. So you usually want to be where there's some definition, but it's not clear over here and you don't see the gray anymore. The more gray you can show and still showing lines, the better this technique works. So you just kind of have to eyeball it, click OK, and then change the mode from normal to overlay, and that immediately creates sharpness. Can you see the difference there? Look at like his eyeballs, the headphones, and things like that. It gives you a little more gritty, grungy look. You see when I turn it on and off? And so that's a sharpening technique that's non-destructive because it's just on its own layer. So that was the high pass. Hue saturation techniques, I went in and made an adjustment layer and pulled the saturation down. We've talked about that. I adjusted the levels over here and I brightened this one up and kind of blew it out a little bit so it's more of a high key or a overexposed image. I made a drawing of it, which added a little more grunge. You can see here, so we've done all those techniques before. And then I took a gradient map, and you see, instead of the black and white one that we used before, I used one that was a little bit more like a rainbow, but I specifically used colors in creating this that were going to give me a little more of a 1970s look. If you haven't made a gradient all on your own, let me kind of show you how to do that. So this goes from blue to red to yellow, which gives us a little purple and a little orange. I'm going to go ahead and load a different gradient, which isn't giving us that effect anymore, and think to myself, what if I didn't have that one as an option, which I don't really anymore. Well, no, I do. I guess it's right there. But let's pretend I don't have it. If I'm on any other gradient, all I have to do is come over here to these little crayons, double click them, and select the colors that I want to apply. So there's blue. Over here, double click, I can go to yellow. And then to get the orange in the middle, you notice there isn't a little crayon. There's this little thing which determines where the transition takes place, but I have no other color. And I want to have more than 2 colors in my gradient. So the easy way to do this is hold down your Option key, click on any of the existing colors, and drag, and it duplicates it. Once it's duplicated, I could click on it again, come in, make a choice, click OK, and then that gives me the gradient. If I want another one, I could hold down Option, duplicate it over, double click, oops, come on. There we go. My computer's acting funny. So this is more of an orange tone. So I can do all these different things to create my own custom gradient. Now that doesn't just have to happen in this gradient map editor. I could do the same thing by coming over here, choosing a gradient, clicking on it. Okay, we have the same editor available whether we're using a gradient map or our standard gradient. So this kind of gave me this 1970s kind of a feel. I added some texture on top of it. So using, if we could take this back to normal, put it at 100%, I had this really grody metal texture that I went and messed around with. So I'll go back in time on that one. Did it again with some more metal, and then actually hand painted some blue and put it in color mode. So in this case I just created a new layer, chose a color that I thought would make this look a little more vintage or 70s. Grabbed a big soft paintbrush, make it a little bit bigger, painted it in. Right now my opacity is at 50%, so I'm not hitting it at full bore. And then when I change this mode from normal to color, it makes a much more believable interaction, and I can pull it back. Now these are a little bit, this texture's a little bit rough, so I'd pull those back a little. I would maybe mess with this gradient map and see if I need more or less of it. But you see it kind of has that sun-faded look with a little bit of a tooth. You can always go in as well and use a technique like we did with our painting. Click a new layer, perhaps get white paint, get a rough paintbrush. Go ahead and make it a little bit bigger. Brush out some of the corners so it looks like it's faded or there's like a little bit of a photo border around it. Does that make sense? And give it a little bit of a cropped in look. So you guys see that a lot. You can actually buy a lot of those already pre-done online, or you can probably find them for free. So there's a technique where we used everything we just talked about plus a few more techniques to give us a really kind of a funky look. Alright, what's next? I'm going to double check in your folder. I included this one, which is a cross-process technique, so you're welcome to disassemble that and use it. Cross-processing was a process that was used a lot in traditional photography where you would shoot with one kind of a film and then you would develop for another, and it gives you this real grainy, reds really stand out hard, the yellows kind of get a little glowy, and then the green and grain kind of give you a real kind of urban feel. So you're welcome to kind of pull that file apart and see how it's put together. This technique 5 is a little more involved, and so I wanted to show you how to do something like this if you want to open up your image. This image starts here. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, throw it away. Oops. So we start with an image like this, and now we want to remove it, make it look a little bit more like it was shot in a studio, and apply some different background techniques. So I went ahead on this image and I cut out this girl. I did that with the pen technique that we talked about last week, and then I just clicked on my mask to apply a, wait, make sure I'm on the right layer, to apply a mask to that image, which got rid of the background. This one I did just on my regular background layer, and you can see I've actually duplicated. I didn't use this one to start to manipulate. I just had it kind of sitting in the back. I created a gray layer with a big white dot in the middle, which gives me a little bit of a photo background. That's really easy to make. All I did was I clicked a new layer, got a light gray color, got my fill tool or paint bucket tool, dropped it in. Then I got white as my foreground color, a big soft paintbrush. Again, you could do this with a gradient if you prefer. Came over here and hit it a couple times. Let's see. I'll come back to those. Then I grabbed the picture of the girl down here at the bottom, and I copied it and put it up here, so now she's on top of this gray background. And I actually took that picture, copied it again, and I went ahead and deleted this mask but applied it. I dragged it to the garbage and hit apply. That got rid of it but still maintained her. From here I could just go to that and go filter, blur, motion blur, and do kind of like we did last time with that other girl, but I'm going to do it just on an even plane. You can create as much or as little blur as you want. You can actually then go into it with your move tool and offset it if you wanted it to push one way or the other. That just adds a little bit of interest. It's probably too much for me, so I'll pull it back. It brings a little more color into this image, makes it a little more dynamic, adds movement. I adjusted the hue saturation of this image and pulled it down, the color down. Again, messed with the levels to make it more dynamic. And then I even messed with the levels of just her face. So before, when I've done these level commands or I've done these adjustment layers, I've always done them to the entire image. Well, you can click them. So I'm going to click and go into my levels. And you'll notice that every time you make one, it comes with a mask. If you click in the mask, you can, so I'm going to go ahead and adjust this one up. Well, let's make it really bright and dynamic. So let's say I like what it did with her face but not with the rest of her. I can go into that mask and I can paint in, let's see, go the other way, paint in or paint out that adjustment layer, so you can see that here, so that it's not that it's only making the adjustment to the parts that I want it to. You see how that's working? It's painting her back in, it's painting the background back in. Right? I'm not going to use that, but that's one option too. I had a graphic where I just basically, I could have with a font just made a line and repeated it a whole bunch of times or drawn out a couple lines to get this. In this case, I wanted to make it kind of warpy, if you remember how the original image looked. I can grab this right here. I can go into my Apple T to resize it and go to my warp tool, which is here at the top, and grab the corners, and I can start to warp this. So instead of just resizing it, I'm actually stretching it out. And warping it. It's kind of like a liquefy tool. Just going to go ahead and hit return. And then I, copied it and did it in different ways. So I'll make another copy here, Apple T it, move it around, stretch it or whatever. And then where it went behind her, I could just Apple click on the mask of her, which gives me the selection, and then just hit delete if I wanted to, or I could go ahead and mask those pieces. And then the last thing, the thing that probably makes this special, is we have all these little highlights. Right, these little sparkles, and they're really simple. All I'm doing is I'm creating a layer, putting it in color mode, and then just deciding which colors I want to kind of sparkle through. So in this case we had kind of a pink. Getting a soft paintbrush, make it a little bit bigger, and I'm looking for areas where the light could kind of come through, and then adjusting the opacity. and then I can erase a little bit if I don't want it in one area or another. I could do the same thing with white and just pop it through in different areas. I can change the size, adjust the opacity. I did the same thing with this kind of blue color, and that just starts to add kind of a shimmerance or a sparkle to it. Then I went ahead and I went around all the edges and initially painted them black. It gives us a little bit of that vignette technique, and I thought, you know what, wouldn't it be interesting if I took that black and went into a color overlay and tried another color instead of black? You know, how would that appear, and what kind of a theme or a look and feel would that give us? And then I just finished it off by putting a thin white border around it, which you can do it mechanically by actually measuring it out, or you can just eyeball it and grab a marquee selection tool, select the inverse or the opposite of it, create a new layer, and fill it with a color. Oops, I want to fill it. I should go to the right layer, right? Click a new layer. Select deselect. So all that is a false frame to crop it. So that's a quick way to kind of get a more fashionable look. And then of course with any of these techniques you can go on forever. You can make all kinds of adjustments. You could change this background color from gray, go into your color overlay and say what would it look like if it were, actually this is behind a hue saturation layer. So you could pull it up and cut around her or cut out of it. There's a bazillion different things you could do to try to make the technique more or less dramatic. This kind of a thing you probably wouldn't want to add texture to it because that would maybe kill it. This is very sleek, very slick looking. So as soon as you add texture or grain, you become a little more gnarly or organic. So, all right. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this one. And I have one that I think is really, really cool that I want to show you guys, but I'm going to take a little break. Basically what this does is it gives us this kind of a thing, which is kind of like a watercolor. Let's see if it's on this one as well. It gives us an image that looks like it was created out of watercolors, kind of a painterly image. And this is using all the things that we've talked about, plus adding some more deliberate texture in paper. So let me pause this video, or hit stop for a minute. We'll come back in 5 minutes at 7, and let's do that. It'll take us about 15 minutes, and I'll give you your assignment. All right. So you start with an image. You generally want to have an image that has pretty good contrast. If everything is very even, you want to try to fake it out a little bit, but better to start with a good image with contrast. The image that they used in the tutorial that I watched was an image of, what's his name? The lead singer of the Doors.
Jim Morrison.
Jim Morrison, right? And it was an old black and white image of him that they did this to. It looked really, really cool. So start with an image with good contrast. I'm going to copy this image, and I'm going to immediately turn it into a black and white. There's tons of ways we can do it. We've learned a really good way. I'm just going to go ghetto really fast and go adjustments, desaturate, pull the color out of it. From here, so you could use the technique that we talked about earlier today, or however you'd prefer, but you need to merge it into one layer so that you have one object to start off with. From here, I'm going to go Image, Adjustments, and I'm going to go to my Brightness and Contrast. And I'm going to try to kick out as much gray as I can. I'm really trying to make this image kind of look like a stamp. So it's a little bit more like vector art. So I'm going to pull the brightness up a little bit and kick out as much of the garbage that I can without affecting my subject too much. So that's a little too much. So I'm going to come here. I can still see some detail in his nose and stuff, but I'm not totally killing him. And then my contrast is the same thing. The more contrast I add, you see it adds more blackness and less gray. So I'm going to come somewhere in this area. I might pull the brightness back a little bit. Okay, I'm going to click OK. Now I'm going to make a copy of this. I'm going to hide the top one and work on the second one. The technique works really well if you utilize a watercolor filter because it gives us a little more diversity in our edges, and if we have an image that's poor resolution, it kind of makes up for that because it's going to kind of smear things around just a hair. So I'm going to go filter, artistic, watercolor. Where is it? And you can see here it starts to add a little bit of that that gray, but it gives you a little bit more of diversity in the image. My brush detail, what did I have when I did this? I had it all the way up to 12. Shadow intensity, I left it where it was. And texture, I just left it at 1. Clicked OK. So you can see that changed our image just a little bit from where we were before. It gave it a little more of a painterly look. Again, it looks a little fake and canned, but for this circumstance, it'll be just fine. Then this top one, I'm going to make it black and white exclusively. So I kind of already killed some of the gray. I allowed the watercolor filter to kind of fill it back in, and then I want to create even more black and white. And so I went to Image Adjustments, Threshold. Threshold makes it look like it's going to come out of a rubber stamp. And I can go either way on this, more or less. What I want to do is come somewhere where I'm not getting all the detail because some of that will be made up by the gray, but I'm getting a lot of nice black solids without looking muddy or overwhelming. So again, on this, you're just going to have to make some judgment calls. I'm just going to say that's great. That means as I apply this watercolor technique, everywhere that's black will be fully expressed in watercolors. I'll click OK. Now how do I get that to interact with that? Multiply. It's a blend mode, but yes, I'm going to go to multiply. And what it does is you see how it thickened up all these black areas in here when I turn it on and off, and added kind of more definition in here where there was maybe some question. It was just kind of a medium gray, but it still allowed some of my other gray to come through. Now once I get here, I'm going to go ahead and shift click these layers together, come over here and do merge layers so they just become one. And then I'm going to want to get my white paintbrush and get rid of everything on here that I don't want to show through. So it's going to be all this white stuff here. So any part of the image that's not meaningful to me, I just want to go ahead and paint it out. You could erase it out, oops, but if I erase it, it'll show the image underneath, so just using white paint tends to work the best. And I can be a little sloppy about this if I want to. Alright. The last thing I can do is I could go Image, Adjustments, Levels, and just fine-tune it a hair more as I'm looking at the composite and say, if I pull out a little bit more of those midtones, and a little more black, does that help? I think so, so I'm going to click OK. So what I've done now is I've got an image that we're going to use as the basis for our technique, and it'll help us to basically have this color watercolor show through. And so I'm going to kind of hide it for a second. I'm going to go get a watercolor background. I just use this piece of paper. You have tons of paper samples, I think, in the file I gave you, so use whatever you like. I'm going to grab this one and drag it over, holding down Shift so it ends up in the center to my image, and I'll resize it. Looks like I just need to rotate it a little bit and get it where I like it. Now this could be, again, any texture, any color. Then I gave you some files that are called watercolor. You could paint these yourself and scan them in. You could go out and find other images. It could be any colors or any textures you want. Watercolor, I think, just happens to look cool, so I grabbed these two, and I gave those to you as well. I'm going to go ahead and drag those so that I can get my move tool, drag them both kind of off for a minute, and then pull them over to this image. So there's the first one, and here's the second. You don't have to have two, you could do it with one, but what we're going to do is just copy them and make a big collage of them, kind of melt them all together. And so the more diversity you have in the size and shape, the more realistic it looks. So these are really big, right? Because they're off my canvas. So I'm going to start with the first one. I'm going to do an apple T, Gonna drag it so I can find one of the corners, shrink it down a little bit, and I'll start with this kind of big. And hit return. Now in order to get the watercolor to interact with the background, what do we do? Anybody remember? We're going to do a multiply. So you go from normal to multiply, and remember it kicks out the white. So there's my first paint splotches. Now I did the other ones on top. I can change those from normal to multiply, and then they'll act with the background and interact with each other, which is really nice. Okay? So once I have those, then I can copy them. So I'm going to copy 3 by dragging the layer to the new layer icon. Let's do an apple T. Go ahead and squish it and pull it around, goof around on it, make it different than the other one. Hit return. I'll maybe grab the first one, apple T, make this much smaller. And now's the time where I can just do lots of copies of each of these. All of them are maintaining that multiply because it was in the first one. If not, I could always change it back. And I'm just going to create a bit of a mess. Now one shortcut key, if you ever are working on a layer and you want to duplicate it and you don't want to come over to your layer palette, is hold down your option key. So right now I'm on this layer here. If I hold down option and drag, when I have my move tool selected, you see how it drug out another version and it created a new layer for me. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that out, switch around the size.
How did you do it again?
You just make sure that whatever layer you want to multiply, make sure you have it selected, get your move tool, and then hold down option as you drag. So I've got this layer now, hold down option and pull it away, and it copies it, creates a new layer in my layer stack as well. And I'm going to flip it around. Yep. So there's no way to know when you're done on this other than when you think you're done. Now the more full it is, the more of that color is going to show through your object. So in this case it's going to be kind of the image of this guy. So you don't want to have tons of gaps because that might be an important area of detail for him. So I'm going to do a few more of these, and I'll do some bigger ones just so that we get kind of a nice, this one I'll do a nice variation in the size and the shape, the colors of this mess. And once you have this mess all working together, you can, I hope, shift click these and do a merge layers and then change it from normal to multiply again because it always wants to go back to normal and have it all as one so you didn't have to deal with all those different versions. And then if you were being really crazy about it, you could copy that one again and make a whole other one, but I think that's getting a little sick. So I'm going to stay with where I was at. Okay, so what I've got now is I've got my paper, I've got my watercolor, or my paint, or my texture, or whatever we want to goes through this guy, and I've got my guy, but there's no interaction between my guy now and my watercolor, right? So what we need to do is create a mask within the watercolor layer of the guy so that it only reveals parts of the watercolor painting that we tell it to reveal, which will make the guy. So how do we do that? Make sure I tell you the right thing here.
I have a question real quick. When I merge mine, the white comes back.
Yeah, so you have to change it back to multiply because the default is that layer wants to go back to normal. So once it's white, now change it to multiply. That work? Awesome. Okay, so here I am. I'm now going to go ahead and hide these for a second. I'm going to click on the layer with the guy, and I'm going to select all. So I have all of him selected. I've got the white, the black, and the gray. All right. Once I have him selected, I am going to copy it. I'm going to edit, copy, or Command-C, just like a copy-paste command. So right now, I've saved into my memory this image in Photoshop. Now, I don't need this selection anymore, so I can deselect it. I'm going to come over here to my layer that has all my paint, and I'm going to click on a mask. So I now have a mask associated with this layer, but I don't have anything on that mask. I now want to put the layer of the guy in there, right? Or sorry, the mask of the guy into that layer so that it only shows him. To do that, what I need to do is come over here to the mask layer, make sure it's selected, and I want to option click it. What that does is it takes us into the full mask mode. So it shows us what we'll be seeing in our mask. Whereas if I didn't option click it, we're just seeing the object. So option click, and then I want to paste him in. So I go edit, paste, or Command V on your keyboard. And there he goes. And you'll notice in my mask right now, there's him. Okay? Now, if you remember, in mask mode, everything that's white shows through, everything that's black goes out. So it's just going to give me the opposite of what I actually want. Does that make sense? So, because if I shift or option click this, you can't see him, but you see everything but him. I'm going to go back in. So I'm going to do an invert. So all I have to do is go Image, Adjustments, Invert. In a mask, you work just like you do on a normal layer. There he is as the devil, right? But when I click it, he comes through. Deselect. So there he is, right, within the mask. Now, we've kind of got this nice ghosted image of him, which is pretty cool. We can go into that and adjust the levels if we want to make it a little darker because it seems a little light. We can also go in there and say, okay, what happens if we take all the watercolors? So I'm going to click on the watercolor part of the layer over here, click on the little chain link, and move those watercolors around. Because underneath the mask, I can do whatever I want. So I might want to try to line his face up so it looks the best possible with the watercolors. Or I can go to the watercolor layer, and I could get like my paintbrush. Let's make it small. I could option click and start to, oops, got the wrong color there. Option click in here. I've got my paintbrush. Am I in mask mode or something? Why is this? There we go. And I could actually paint on this layer. So you see how his nose turned green. So I could fill in some of the spots here through the mask. But if I get beyond the mask, you see how it's not painting out here? But when I come over here, it paints. It's really painting that on my layer. If I was to turn the mask off, you would see that. Oops. I'm going to disable. So you see that green that I painted? It's there. But when the mask is showing, I'm having a hard time. Enable layer mask. Then it shows the green. So that allows me to go in and fix little spots if I want. Make sure that it looks complete, it's not too jaggy. One other thing I like to do, just because I think this is a cool technique again, is I copy this one, throw it on top, copy it, image, adjustments, invert, and I do that little drawing technique. Over the top. Oops, color dodge, right? Now you notice because it has tons of black, the color dodge already starts to show up before I have my Gaussian blur. Gaussian blur helps it a little bit. Click OK, merge them, normal, multiply. There he is on top of himself. Pull back the opacity, pull it back up, and it kind of fills in some of those areas. You can see it adds a little more definition if I like that. And then do whatever you want. Like if this was an ad, you can put your text over here. You can go into your piece of paper and you can burn it. I'll teach you how to do this really quick. And this will be the end of the discussion here. So when you're working with photographs, the old school way when you're in the darkroom to lighten and darken a photograph was called dodging and burning. Dodging allowed you to make things lighter or whiter, burning darker or blacker. It's not just like adding black paint and white paint. It actually changes the exposure. So if something's yellow, it makes it brighter yellow to, or a cream color all the way to white at the end, but that's at the end. If it's brown, it makes it a darker brown, darker brown, darker brown, more of a saturated brown until it gets to black. So it's a very nice technique because it enables you to have natural color. When you're talking Photoshop, you have a dodge and burn tool, but you have to work on the layer that you want to affect, which becomes a permanent change, and we don't like that. So I developed a trick to trick Photoshop into thinking that you're dodging and burning something without having to be on the layer. And I'm not super smart, it's really easy. You just click a new layer, and instead of just clicking and starting on it, if you option click it, it brings this palette up. This palette also comes up if you go layer, new layer from here. Right now the color mode is set to normal. If you set that down to overlay, it gives you the option fill with neutral gray. I'm going to click that. What happens is neutral gray when we're in overlay mode becomes transparent. Everything darker than neutral gray deepens and multiplies, gives you that multiply effect on our object. Everything that's lighter lightens or screens it. So it's kind of a composite between the screen and multiply command screen and multiply blend mode in your layer palette. So if I click OK, you notice over here there's this layer that's filled with neutral gray, but it doesn't show up. If I turn this to normal, you just see gray and it would cover my image. That's no good. So I want to leave it at overlay. But as I get a paintbrush with white or black, watch what happens. Here I have it with black. This is going to darken up. I'm going to reduce my opacity so I don't hit it full steam, but it's going to darken up. You see how it's darkening my paper? It's not making it black. It's darkening. Now if I hit it there for 10 years, it might make it black. But what this does is it gives us a nice kind of burning look in different parts of my paper, which kind of weathers it. Whereas if I got white, you see how it's kind of lightening it? If I click white on him, you see how it's kind of lightening it, but it's not necessarily adding white. So this fake dodge and burn is really great for backgrounds and stuff like this. It's also great for people's faces. So you can go into their eyes, and if I had a better, we'll do another technique on photo sweetening, on making people's skin smooth and stuff. You can go in and make people's eyes look super glassy or super, you can add soul, basically these little highlights and stuff in people's eyes, which are really incredible. And a lot of it's using these techniques. So you don't actually have to go into the real eye and do it and mess it up. You do it on a layer on top, and then you adjust the opacity back and forth. You adjust the color on a separate layer back and forth. Get it how you want it, and you can always change it again later. So it's non-destructive ways of manipulating your canvas or your subject and getting the most options possible in the way that you make something or the way that you present something. And that's what I'm all about. I hope you guys like that too. So this technique I think is really cool. You have everything that you need to make this happen. It works really great with some photographs. Some, if they're not dynamic, it's going to be a little bit more of a struggle. But I encourage you to at least give this one a try, because to me, if I go ahead and finish this out and do some text and stuff on it, if that was a picture of my kid or something, I'd want to hang that on the wall because it looks pretty cool. It looks like custom artwork, right? Let me throw out your assignment and then answer questions and then help you guys for the rest of the class. What we're going to have you guys do this time is to create a photograph treatment of your choice. You could do the one I just showed you, or you could do something else we talked about earlier, or you could do something completely different. I don't care. I just want to see you using all these tools and creating composites between different layers using adjustments. I want to see a before and an after, so you're going to hand in 2 separate sheets to me. And this screen cap should be in your folder, so you don't need to type it. I want the example before and the example after. Go ahead and in those 2 sheets next week. There's no right or wrong way to do it, but I do want to see a big change, and I want to look at the after and think, wow, this is cool. All right? So use whatever techniques you like. That would be awesome. Let me stop this recording thing.